In the time that we've been partnered with Ionis Pharmaceuticals, as Scott sort of alluded to, we've progressed two of those compounds from ISIS through to the completion of successful phase 2 clinical trials in their respective indications. We call these drugs AT1102 and AT1103. And both those drugs, the phase 2 clinical trial results have been published in high-quality peer-reviewed scientific journals. Our major shareholders are Australian Ethical Investment and Platinum Asset Management. They came onto the register early last year in a financing that we undertook to support a trial in Duchenne's Muscular Dystrophy, just as Scott highlighted. And so Oz Ethical have just over 17% and Platinum about 6% of the company. And so they were the major sponsors or financiers of this capital raising that we ran to undertake this trial in Duchenne's muscular dystrophy. Duchenne's is one of the most common genetic disorders. It affects boys only. It's caused by a mutation of a gene that's responsible for making a key protein for muscle function. So these boys don't make enough of this protein called dystrophin, which leads to progressive muscle loss, failure, and unfortunately, 100% fatal. So all these boys unfortunately succumb to the disease within usually the second decade. There are no effective treatments for this disease, particularly for the inflammation that's associated with the dystrophin loss. And there really is a high unmet need for better therapies to treat this progressive destructive inflammation. And so we are running a phase 2 clinical trial at the Royal Children's Hospital here in Melbourne. We had recently reported that we're now over 50% enrolled in that particular study. And so we are expecting that we'll have all patients into the trial and dosing complete by the third quarter of this year, with results to follow shortly thereafter. The other drug that I will go through briefly in my presentation today is a drug called AT1103. It's been shown to have a significant benefit in patients who are suffering from a disease called acromegaly, which is an abnormal growth disorder. I'll go through that indication a little bit more detail in my presentation. But what we're looking to do with that compound now is that based on the positive data that we've generated in phase 2 clinical trials, we're looking to make the drug available to patients in Europe under what's known as an early access basis. So this is legislation that exists in Europe that allows for non-registered drugs to be accessed by patients who are essentially failing or not tolerating existing therapies. And companies can make application to get reimbursement for drug supply at essentially the same price or cost as what existing therapies are available. So we are working towards setting that program up in Europe. We've got a partner group called My Tomorrow's there that is specialises in setting up and managing these early access programs. So that's another key initiative that we're running this year. And as sort of highlighted at the end of the slide, we're also looking to actively add to the existing pipeline by bringing on complementary projects. So that program runs in parallel with the two that I've just highlighted. Turning then to what is Antisense technology and how does it work? I guess simply put, it's a novel way of making highly targeted and effective medicines. Antisense drugs are essentially small pieces of chemically modified DNA, and they're designed to block the production of a specific disease-causing proteins. So it's what we would term or is known as a platform technology. That is that you can use this antisense technology to design antisense drugs to block the production of many disease-causing proteins, which makes it applicable for a broad range of diseases. So our partner, Ionis Pharmaceuticals, they've been working on this technology now for over 25 years. They have 3 antisense drugs now registered with regulatory authorities in the US and Europe. They have a pipeline of over 40 drugs that are in clinical development, with either in their, that they're managing themselves or with partners such as Antisense Therapeutics. Half of those are in phase 2 trials or later. So we know now there's been I think, over 10,000 patients that have been safely treated with this technology. So, it reflects the very significant market capitalisation that Ionis have generated, and it gives us massive confidence moving forward with our own program in Duchenne's. So the pipeline is really focused on disorders where there's a need for improved therapy. And we have worldwide exclusive licenses from Ionis to our drugs for all disease indications. So we have AT1102 for Duchenne Muscular Dystrophy and AT1103 for acromegaly. And I'll go through those in more detail in my presentation. We also have AT1102 in MS, where we've demonstrated positive effects in multiple sclerosis patients, and that data has been published in a peer-reviewed scientific journal, Journal of Neurology. But given the time constraints today, or being sensitive about the time, I won't go into that program. I'll just focus on DMD, and I'll touch on the acromegaly program. So with respect to AT1102 for DMD, as I highlighted earlier, DMD is the most common genetic disorder of boys, which leads to progressive muscle loss and wastage. It essentially has the boys losing the ability to walk initially. They end up in wheelchairs. Subsequently, the boys need full-time care, and unfortunately, they will eventually deteriorate to a stage where either respiratory or cardiovascular failure will lead to their loss of life. So it's an orphan drug indication. It affects about 1 in 3,500 patients. So there's about 45,000 boys with Duchenne's in the Northern Hemisphere. We think probably about 1,000 or thereabouts here in Australia. In 2016 was a sort of seminal year for the Duchenne space, in that a company called Sarepta Therapeutics received approval for the world's first drug that was looking to restore the levels of dystrophin in these boys. And so they got approval from a study in only 12 boys. And it was really unheard of previously with the FDA. That is, the FDA giving approval for a drug with what was essentially limited clinical data. But such is the need, for boys with this indication that they approved that drug. And that drug is, though, only effective in about 13% of boys with Duchenne's who have the specific genetic mutation that drug is designed to affect. But even though the data they generated was relatively preliminary, showing a slight increase in dystrophin, drug is selling now. I think the last quarterly sales were around about $80 million. So it's tracking as a $300 million project. And again, only the 13% of boys that it's effective. Whereas at all boys with Duchenne's will eventually need to have the inflammation associated with the disease treated. And the only way today to address that is with the use of corticosteroids, such as prednisolone. The use of prednisolone is not particularly effective. And the chronic use of the drug, because these boys will need to go on to therapy for the rest of their lives, causes some very serious side effects, such as growth retardation, bone loss, demineralization, but unfortunately, they are the only therapies that are currently available. So our drug AT1102 is going to be sort of directed towards reducing the inflammation in the boys, with a view that we hope to slow the disease progression. Because what we know is that it's the inflammation that drives the muscle wastage and loss.
So do you replace that product?
So we would expect to use it in combination, or it would be complementary to this drug, where they're looking to increase the dystrophin levels and at the same time looking to reduce or dampen the inflammatory process. So this slide here just sort of lists the sort of key drivers. Why would we want to look to test AT1102 in that setting as a treatment for the inflammation associated with DMD? Well, firstly, as I highlighted earlier, there is definitely a acknowledged need for better therapies, because prednisolone is a drug that was approved, I think, over 60 years ago. So there hasn't been a new innovation in this area in all that time. So there's a really strong desire to improve on what's available today. The other key influencer is that, as I highlighted earlier, this drug H1102 has been tested in patients with multiple sclerosis. And so we showed in MS patients, where we dosed the patients rather for only a couple of months, that we were able to significantly reduce the inflammatory lesions in their brain. So with only 2 months of dosing, 1 month past the last dose, we showed a 90% reduction in the inflammatory lesions in these patients. So we know the drug's having activity, at least in MS patients, on important inflammatory processes, which we expect to be relevant to the boys in Duchenne. So we know the drug's working, at least in the MS patient population. The other key influencer was that in late 2016, a publication appeared in a key scientific journal that highlighted that boys with Duchenne's that had white blood cells, lymphocytes, that had high levels of a receptor on them called CD49D. And the reason that's significant in the case of what we're doing is it's the actual biological target of our drug. So it's the disease-causing protein that we're looking to reduce the production of with our drug H1102. They found that boys that had more of this CD49D on their lymphocytes were at risk of greater severity of the disease symptoms and faster or more rapid progression with the disease. So they said, this looks to be a really interesting diagnostic prognosticator of disease severity, but also a really interesting immunotherapy target. So it was that publication of that data that really drove our interest in moving our drug H1102 into Duchenne's, because they were very keen, because we've been in touch with the investigators involved in the study. One of them is actually on our scientific advisory board, and they were very excited to hear that we had a program that we thought that we could move very rapidly into the clinic for those boys. The other thing is it is an orphan drug indication, so we do expect to be able to benefit from the IP and development incentives that are available to people developing or companies developing orphan drugs. The other really essential feature of us getting into Duchenne's and helping it, guide us with the clinical trial program is the scientific advisory board that we've brought together for this program. It really is, recognised as, a highly experienced and internationally recognised group in the Duchenne's space, not only in the clinical development, but also the commercialisation of drugs. And I'll just highlight a couple of names in that list there. We've got the 2 investigators from the Royal Children's Hospital on our advisory board, Ian Woodcock and Professor Monique Ryan out at the Royal Children's Hospital. Steve Wilton and Sue Fletcher are scientists out at the Murdoch Hospital in Perth, and they're famous for being the inventors of the drug eteplirsen. That's the drug I mentioned earlier from the company Sarepta, which was the first drug approved for the treatment or restoration of the dystrophin levels. So the inventors of that drug that's selling, at about $300 million a year, Aussies out at the Murdoch Hospital. So they're, advisors on our board. They were actually we were introduced to them by the last name on this list here, a chap called Bill Goolsby. Bill's a non-executive director on my board. Bill used to be a non-executive director and chairman for a period of Sarepta Therapeutics. So we got Bill on before actually we moved the drug into Duchenne's. We brought him on because of his experience at Sarepta. The drug that Sarepta is developing is actually an antisense compound, similar to what we're developing. So we brought Bill on to help us with the development of our pipeline, and then subsequently we saw that pivotal paper from the Journal of Skeletal Muscle, and Bill introduced us to Steve and Sue, and so we're very excited by the quality of this team that we've brought together. Not only, as I said, are they experienced in the clinical development of the drug, but the commercialisation, see a drug all the way through to market and achieving some very substantial revenues.
Is that the drug that got FDA approved with 12 patients?
Yes. Yep, that's the one that got approved in 12 patients. So just this slide just highlights that there are a number of ways in which DMD is being tackled presently. So it's coined there the intervention points. So there are a number of companies working in this area. You've got there, of course, Sarepta with their eteplirsen program looking at the dystrophin increases. You've also got companies that are looking at addressing the cardiac symptoms, as I said, which are quite often the cause for the fatality in these boys with their hearts failing. You've also got companies focused on looking to regenerate or increase the muscle growth. And then those that are focused on the respiratory symptoms. Over in the right-hand corner of this chart here, you'll see, the inflammatory components. So, there really isn't much competition that is shaping there. So there's a couple of companies that have got drugs that are looking at the inflammation. We suspect that our drug, like with the Sarepta drug, probably if they show to be successful in the clinic, more likely to be used in combination. So we sort of see this space as being more complementary than it is going to be competitive. This slide here just really talks to we believe the value creation potential of AT1102. And it's just a little bit of background on Sarepta Therapeutics, where, as you've heard us say, we've got multiple connection points into that company with Bill Goolsbee on our board, with Steve and Sue, the inventors of their drug, on our advisory board. So the drug was approved in 2016 under an accelerated pathway. This is their Sarepta's drug, showing some moderate increases in skeletal muscle. There was a massive lobbying effort from the advocacy groups in the US to get this drug on the market. So, it was successful in that regard. Bill tells us when he was with the company, when they started the program back in 2012, he said they had a capitalisation of about 50 million. And it took them just over 4 years before they saw approval of this drug. So on approval, the drug market capitalisation peaked at 3.3 billion. Today, there's a market cap approaching 9 billion. And they're solely focused, this company, on Duchenne's. So they have, beyond this drug, they've got some other drugs in their pipeline looking to increase the dystrophin levels in boys that have got a different genetic mutation than the one that this initial drug is focused on treating. So they are more than just the one drug, but just the one drug on the market presently. Drug selling for about $300,000 a year. And as we said, we think, it shows the value creation potential for what is what is an orphan disease with a small population, but clearly the market perceives of the huge potential that's there. So this slide just reviews the current status of the clinical trial that we're running at the Royal Children's Hospital. We're going to run the study in nine ambulant boys. So these are boys that are wheelchair bound, who have progressed from the stage, as I said, being able to walk, to now where they need assistance. So we're going to be looking at the drug's effects over 6 months of dosing. It's primarily a safety and tolerability study, but we will be looking at the drug's effects on the inflammation and the muscle deterioration in these boys. So we're looking at some key progression endpoints, the type of endpoints that would be valid for seeing the regulatory authorities giving approval to the drug. So we've got 4 boys in the trial. We just put an update out recently that are on drug, and a 5th patient that's past screening due to be dosed on early February. So we're over 50% enrolled in the trial, on track to have all patients in and dosing complete the 3rd quarter of this year, with results to follow. No serious adverse events reported to date. Happy with the safety profile of the drug as it's been perceived today. As I said, 6 months of dosing is a long dosing period. Wouldn't be too many local companies that have studies running for that at that period, and we think that's what gives us a great opportunity in this study to be able to show some benefits on these key disease endpoints of muscle function. But it's what we call an open label study. So the investigators and the patients aren't blinded to the data. The benefit, if you like, of having an open label study is that we're not prevented from having a look at the data as it emerges from the study. So there is the opportunity, we know, believe, that preliminary data could emerge that we think rises to the level of materiality that would be warranted for us to say something, in a sufficient number of patients. So we just sort of highlight that as we're expecting the final results to come through after the dosing's complete in the third quarter, but there is a chance for us to be reporting on it earlier than that. So I'm just going to switch gears now and talk about our other drug, H1103 for acromegaly. Acromegaly is an abnormal growth disorder. It's caused by a benign tumour of the pituitary gland. And this tumour causes patients to produce too much growth hormone, leading to abnormal growth effects and an increase in the risk of chronic disorders like cancer, diabetes and hypertension. These patients have a much increased risk of mortality if the disease is not treated. So our drug, AT1103, is designed to block the receptor for the growth hormone. So when you reduce the receptor for the growth hormone, you blunt or block the effects of growth hormone itself. So we've done multiple animal studies and human clinical trials to show this drug effectively reduces the effects of the growth hormone, and by actually reducing down a key and associated hormone called insulin-like growth factor 1, IGF-1. And it's IGF-1 that produces all the nasties in this disease, and every study we've run to date with this drug, we've been able to show we can reduce IGF-1 levels. We ran a phase 2 clinical trial. That data was recently published in the highly regarded European Journal of Endocrinology. So it's touched on earlier, we're looking to make this drug available to patients in Europe by establishing an early access program. As I said, this is legislation that allows for non-registered drugs to be made available for patients in need of improved therapies who aren't being adequately treated with existing therapies. We've got enough drug for about 10 patients for a year. We will be seeking reimbursement in markets where we can. We know that we can charge around the going rate for therapy for a second-line therapy for acromegaly, which is around that $80,000 to $100,000 a year. So there's a significant income generating potential here for us, but also the ability for us to generate some new data, and also in the process, we think, attract pharmaceutical partnering interest in the program. So at the moment, we've got drug ready to go. We're just working with our partner, Tomorrows, who are going to run the regulatory process for us, do all the distribution, just generating some more data to get us to that point where we can make our applications to the regulatory authorities and start distributing drug. So last slide, and thanks everyone for patience and attention. So, the case in summary and looking at sort of near-term drivers for the company, we do have an advanced clinical stage pipeline with 2 drugs that have successfully completed phase 2 clinical trials, and we're leveraging that data in the programs that we're moving forward with. With respect to Duchenne Muscular Dystrophy, we've got over 50% now trial enrolment, and the opportunity for early study readouts, as highlighted earlier, because it's an open label study. The drug potentially complementary to other Duchenne's programs, including those from Sarepta. It is a significantly underserved market, and we look to Sarepta to give investors a view as to what sort of value can be driven here by successful programming in this space. And we're really greatly assisted by a highly experienced and credentialed scientific advisory board. We've got the early access program as an opportunity to generate some meaningful revenue and also generate new data on the program and look to attract pharmaceutical partner interest. And we continue to look to add to our pipeline that in a synergistic ways.